All right, LinkedIn land. It is Friday at 1 o'clock Pacific, which means, Tom, it's also Friday at 4 o'clock Eastern. So we are hitting people on the downslope, the end of the downslope of the week. But very excited to do this. So let me set the table a little bit. So we do a lot of content at Heinz Marketing. We do sales pipeline radio. We do the CMO groups. We do a lot of blog posts. I really, for as we grow the business, it's important to me that we increase the public presence and exposure of all the amazing people that work here, the great work that people do, the experience they have. This is 13 years ago, and it was just me and a laptop and a bus pass. It was me, and now it's way bigger than that. And the work is being done, quite frankly, by Tom and Maria and everybody else at the back of the company. So it was really important to me that we sort of give more people exposure, more people credit for that work, the great work that they're doing, and just help y'all meet more people from the company. So Tom volunteered first. I don't know if that was a great idea or terrible idea. We'll find out. But I thought, what better way to do it than on a Friday afternoon in kind of a casual format. We'll make it easy. I'll just throw you some softballs. We'll just talk about what we talk about, and all get to meet and get to know Tom a little better. So Tom Swanson, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here. This will be fun. I'm excited.
All right. So I think we probably have some other Heinz Marketing folks that are watching this that may be heckling from the side. I may or may not throw some of their heckles into the feed here. Like I said, we're going to have some fun with it. But for those that don't know you, Tom, if you could just introduce yourself, who you are, where you're from, where you're calling from, first time, and let's just get to know you a little better.
Yeah. So I'm Tom. I'm from Seattle, like just about everybody else at Heinz Marketing, but originally from Minnesota and then Arizona for a little while. I got sick of the sun and the rocks and the dirt and wound up coming here to Seattle. So I've been doing marketing and communications work for about 10 years now. Done a variety of different things at a variety of different companies, little tiny itty bitty agencies that were 4 people. Shout out to Odd Dog. To big agencies that were a few thousand, and then the bulk of my work was actually at an organization called Foundry 10. They do a lot of education research. It's a philanthropy, and I did their communications work, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. I mean, we started there with just 2 people, grew it up to about 35 by the time I left, and now I'm back in agency world, which is a lot of fun. So yeah, that's my broad pathway.
Well, we're really happy to have you here, and I think one of the things that's exciting about as we grow our team, I'm not looking for culture fits. I'm looking for culture adds and values fits, right? So we've got a core set of values that are important to us, and always looking for people that can expand just the quality of company we have and just continue to add and build the great culture. We'll get into Dungeons and Dragons here in a little bit.
Oh yeah,
but let's first start with. Let's start with, so we were talking about like what the heck could we talk about here, and there's a million places to go. Given the fact that you came from sort of the philanthropic LLC, not a B2B company, not a SaaS company, but as we started talking about the things you were doing, I mean, like it's amazing how in common things are. I mean, and even just this, maybe I don't want to steal your thunder, but talk about the story we shared around challenging the status quo, and how when we think about that in a B2B environment with a buyer of a complex B2B solution, there's a status quo in every decision, whether it's buying or donating or what have you.
Yeah, so that was actually a big challenge that we faced at Foundry 10, right? So we're a philanthropic LLC, as you mentioned, basically functions a lot like a nonprofit, but just wasn't classified that way for a few reasons. But that's beside the point. Education is really resistant to change. Unless you go to a handful of select schools that tend to be private, but we were working largely with public schools. So it's hard to get change to happen there. And our primary objective was to explore new ideas, new innovations in learning, and expand the way people think about learning was our broad mission statement. So the communications challenge around that was really, how do we present the findings that we and our partners have uncovered in a way that's going to sufficiently challenge what the way that educators, parents, communities, and other researchers were really thinking about education. So we needed to present, I mean, honestly, we needed to present our our findings in a way that is not dissimilar to how B2B content looks and works. We had a journey that people would go through in terms of how they thought about the change, what would spur them to think, hey, there might be a different way to do this lesson, or there might be a new curriculum, or these particular standards could be taught in a different way. So we wanted to, we had to build content that at first would, that top funnel content, right? That at first would start to challenge those assumptions that they already had. And then we would need to connect that to how they were thinking about the work that we did. And those dots could be challenging to connect. And then last but not least, we had to get them to actually implement it. And the most challenging part was to get them to tell us about it, right? Like, you know, the big goal that we used to talk about was, if somebody found our work and was able to implement it into their classroom without ever having to talk to us, that would be a huge win, because they would have come across it in the wild. They would have integrated it into their classroom, all anonymous to us. And that's a huge discussion in B2B that as I've kind of entered into that world, I've noticed is, how do you get people when they're in this anonymous state to challenge the status quo on their own, as prompted by your content and by the content of theoretically your competitors as well. But then how do you get them to associate the change that they need to make in their day-to-day or in their strategy with whatever it is that you're presenting, with whatever that product looks like? So that there's a lot of kind of weird similarities there that I thought was pretty interesting.
Well, and as you think about, sometimes I think about, like, what are the things we can leverage now that might be sort of trends in terms of how people are accessing information, or how they're sharing with each other, or virtual versus remote, like all the things that seem like they are things that more come and go. And then there's the eternals, right? There's and it's not to make a sort of a Marvel reference yet, but then there's the things that always have been and always will be. Like, one of my favorite marketing books of all time, still this day, is called Scientific Advertising by Claude Hopkins. It was written in like 1921. But if you read it, you're like, oh, this would really help me right now, right? So I think about just the psychology of buying, the mirror people put in front of themselves to say, like, you know, do I want to be associated with brand? Do I want to be able to say this happened to me? I mean, I think about even just like, you know, when we think about like, you know, what, you know, going on vacation versus relaxing for the weekend, it's a place, but it's a feeling. Right. And so I think if you really get down to it, it's not, buildings aren't buying anything, people are. Jen here, I don't know if you can see this on the screen here. In comparison with education, manipulating B2B buying committees must seem simple. Jen, you know better. We're not manipulating anything here. We're not forcing anything to happen. We're enabling people to buy and better themselves, their lives, and their business. But honestly, it's a fair point, because I think, you know, is it, from what you've seen so far, Tom, you think about this challenging the status quo in someone's work environment. Is that actually a little easier of a lower bar than in someone's personal environment? Are people maybe a little more stuck and or scared, do you think, of challenging their status quo or committing to change in a personal versus professional environment?
I mean, I think it depends on what you're talking about, right? When it comes to education, we're talking about people's children. Like, and that's a hard status quo to change. Like, when, you know, parents tend to relate a lot of the educational experiences that their kids are having with the ones that they had when they were younger. That was something that we heard a lot. And so to get people to let go of those really strongly held beliefs is a real challenge. And in particular, I mean, I thought a lot about the buying committee in preparation for this talk, and what was the buying committee like in education, where you have almost like a tiered committee. But you've got, you know, you want to appeal to the educators. And there's a lot of research that shows that when something happens at the school level, like when there's an innovation that happens at the classroom level, it ladders up to the school level, then ladders up to the district levels. People take notice. And that's how you had to do it. You had to start at that micro level and build up. So yeah, I mean, but to answer your question, when it comes to personal issues, I do think it's a little more challenging, but it depends on how high involvement the decision is. And when it comes to people's kids, it's really high involvement. They want to make sure that their kids are getting the best chance, and rightly so. And getting the best education that they can. But, you know, for other things, like in my personal life, if I had to think about, you know, what status quo would I challenge, it would be easy, you know, I can't pull any off the top of my head. Restaurants, I guess, like where do I go to eat normally? I'd be an easy sell for me. How I make decisions around things like, you know, what products to buy off the shelf or what brands I like is relatively low involvement, but the higher involvement you go, and in particular kids, the more challenging it becomes.
So let's take this analogy from like professional versus personal to even sort of internally, right? And so Tom is he's a member of our world-class amazing client engagement team. Tom and others on the team are basically leading. They're sort of the day-to-day leader and coordinator of our projects that we're doing with clients, and that includes it's coordinating an internal group, it's coordinating a client group. And so you've got multiple people that, many of which don't report to you, right? And they've got, clients certainly don't report to you, and yet we're trying to sort of get everybody to move and coordinate in the same direction. And those are kind of two different things. There's the macro, we're trying to achieve this outcome, we all need to go this way, right? Or my camera pointing this way. And then there's all the level of there's the how many different variables and levels of detail that all get done by different people that you have to coordinate, work together. Talk about coordination from that perspective, just to ensure work gets done effectively, successfully, and in a way that sort of respects everyone along the way.
Yeah, I mean, it's the biggest thing, at least for me, has been communication. We've seen a lot of advances in tools that are geared around facilitating communication in the pandemic, and those have been instrumental. But the core concepts remain largely the same. I'm a big fan of just radical transparency in general, to pull from Ray Dalio's principles. It's an excellent book, but he talks about the need for that really, I guess, radical, to use a term again, transparency to an extreme, like making sure that everybody knows where things are at, but also what you're thinking and how you're thinking about those things. And it goes from, being able to communicate feedback internally to being able to give it externally and talk to clients candidly about, hey, how are things going? How are you feeling about the work that we're doing? But also, like, to be able to push back both ways and voice a disagreement, or if we have a different perspective on something, and for them to feel comfortable doing the same. It all comes down to that open dialogue. And that's been the biggest thing with collaboration. I mean, there's, we could talk about project management tools and Smartsheet and Monday and Asana and all these lovely, awesome tools to keep things moving forward and organized and together. But if you're not talking about it, if you're not having that frequent line of communication to the people that you're solving these problems with, then the problems become infinitely harder to solve, and if not, stop entirely.
Well, and problems, obstacles, like, addressing and fixing issues like that, sometimes that is the work, right? Like, we wouldn't be called in, or we wouldn't be hired if there wasn't something that needed to be fixed. And if it was so easy that we were going to be 100% right all the time, you probably could have just done it already. So I think your point about communication is also just sort of calling a spade, and, pointing out, like, hey, listen, there's a problem over here. Let's not pretend it's not a problem. And maybe even, like, this maybe sound, maybe we caused the problem because you hired us to try to figure out a better way to do something, and we tried something that didn't work. Yeah. Better to admit it didn't work and say, like, well, we tried. We all thought this might work, but it didn't. So let's not keep trying to push this rock uphill. Let's try something different. It's an important part of the process.
Yeah, and as long as you have as long as you have the measures in place to see what didn't work and why, right? Like, that's been one of the biggest things I've enjoyed about this, is the measurability of things is improving every single day. And so if you're going to go in there and say, hey, this problem is, here's this thing that's not working, you have to have the data to back it up. And be able to say, okay, well, we know this isn't working, but here's how we tell why that is, and here's what we should try next. I mean, I'm a big proponent of experimentation in all of its forms. I love experimenting, particularly with marketing. So anything that we can do that tests something out, even if it doesn't work, still gives us information that we can use going forward, which I'm absolutely a big fan for.
There's a Patrick Lencioni who wrote the book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He writes a lot of business fable kind of books.
The Advantage, Death by Meeting, all good.
Yes. He wrote a book called Getting Naked, which someone referred to me once, and the context didn't stick with me right away. But once I finally read it, I got it, because the point about his point about getting naked is saying, like, you're leveraging vulnerability as a superpower. And one of the things he mentions in the book that has stuck with me for years, he says, like, there are 3 fears that people often have, especially in a service context, that keep them from giving their best work to whoever they're working with. It's the fear of being wrong, it's the fear of sounding dumb, and the fear of getting fired. right? And as consultants, like we face that fear on a daily basis, right? Like, and it's easy sometimes to sort of not lean into it, but just to fall into that and say like, well, I really want this call to go well, or I really wish this was going better, or I don't want to address this hard problem. Like, if you're a salesperson, you're not asking the hard questions like, is this really a short-term priority for you? Are you really willing to go to bat for budget to make this happen? Like, you have to ask the hard questions. And then as service providers, we have to be willing to say, to put it on the line a little bit, but then do that in the context of a relationship with a client where you know it's going to be received, where you know that vulnerability, the superpower nature of that vulnerability will be at least accepted, if not reciprocated.
Yeah, and that's a challenge, but at the same time, I mean, I feel like it's a responsibility as a consultant to voice those issues when we see them, like, and to not hide from them, because the goal is to create better outcomes for the clients. You can't do that if you don't have that honesty and you're not willing to get vulnerable with it. I had a professor back at UW for my business capstone operations course, who talked about the work that he did on the mouse at Microsoft. And he tells this great story. It's this long fable. It took like 30 minutes to get through. But the gist of it was he spoke up about the design of the mouse when nobody else would. And he talked about how important it is to be honest with what you're seeing and feeling, particularly in an operational setting where the outcomes, are really concrete, but also really anywhere. So when you see those problems, to speak up, and that always stuck with me. I always envisioned myself trying to be one of those people who could speak honestly, even when it is something that is hard to hear.
Yeah.
But just to make sure that we're calling it out and addressing issues as they come up and not hiding from them.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of really good sort of best practices in literature around how to do that well. I think, Patrick Lencioni's Getting Naked is certainly helpful. Brene Brown, in her work, she talks about.
It's a great book.
Yeah, she talks about the idea that what you hear and what you perceive. If you put someone on the defensive, it's not going to go well. There's a version of yes and, a lesson from improvisation that sort of works well there. When you say like, the story I'm telling myself when I hear that is right.
Yeah.
So to say like, because sometimes it's real, sometimes it's just here's what I'm hearing, and oftentimes you bring that up, you're like, okay, this isn't real, and this is what is not said in those communication cycles, right? And again, I'm still just I'm putting this in the context of solving complex problems in a client consultant relationship, having that line of communication, knowing both sides are willing to sort of say, why is it this way? Or when I saw this, here's how I feel about it. Boy, if you can't address those in a proactive manner, if you can't address those in a rapid manner, it's really easy for things just to fester and go downhill really quickly.
Yeah, and the trick of it all, honestly, and this is something I've learned through experience now being in agencies and working with educators and in situations where we had to deliver difficult news at times. There's a nuance to it that you only get from doing it. Like, there have been times where I've presented those kinds of challenging messages in ways that were either too blunt or didn't take into account a particular component of the context. And as you learn those things, you learn how important it is to slow down a little bit. Like, I'm a fast moving person. I don't know if y'all can tell, but I got a lot of energy pretty much all the time. So, and I love sugar, so that probably doesn't help. But I've learned the importance of slowing down, particularly when it comes to delivering that kind of news, and to really think about it and try to consider it from as many angles as possible. It does nobody any good to panic and dive really quickly into an issue and say, oh my God, we have all these problems. Unless obviously there's a time bounded issue. Like, if it needs to be dealt with quickly, yeah, absolutely. But if you got a moment to sit down and think about the challenge and really look at it from a few different angles and try to understand it from the context of the client, the customer, any prospects, and your own team, is sometimes the hardest one to remember. It really helps deliver that news in a productive way and drive conversation forward, which I think is kind of the big goal.
Well, even if you've got to do something quickly or in an agile format, I think doing it in a measured way still makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that, I'm all for bringing passion and excitement and energy into any conversation. But I also think that, there's always room and always time for a pause, always room and time to take a breath, to think about something. And I increasingly, sometimes you'll get an email that's very transactional, just like, oh, you need something, here's something back. More often than not, if I get an email and sort of it's something I got to think about, like, I want it off my plate, I want to move on to something else. But I find that if I read it and read it twice and then move on to something else. Like, go take the garbage out, go walk the dog, go do the dishes, work on this other project. My brain works on a better response. Almost
Yeah.
always it's not just a better, like a non-defensive response. It usually just means I've come up with a better way to encapsulate the issue, or I've come up with a better solution or a better way of stating the solution that might make it clearer. So, and we're not talking about, let me sit on this for 2 weeks and get back to you. I'm talking about, give me 20 minutes
Yeah.
for my brain to do its work, and I think that, it's, especially in a service environment, like we feel like speed is the value. Speed is not what we're delivering. If it was just speed, then it would just be like, oh, just send us a question, we'll just be on email all the time and we'll just get it to you real quick. No, that it's not speed, it's the quality of the insight. Now that is amazing. I think Jen, who's watching this, probably saw this earlier when we finished the second CMO coffee talk. My son, my 8-year-old, was right here, and I usually have a little kind of branded background going on, but I took it off and said, "Hey, Evan, do you want to say hi?" And he's shy, he didn't want to, and then I finally got on to say hi. Then he's like, "Oh, now I'm on camera," so now he thinks he's performing in front of
he's
like,
hamming it up.
People. Oh yeah, that went downhill quickly. But anyway, hey, look, I know we're almost out of time. We got to move on. It is Friday afternoon after all. But I appreciate you doing this. Okay, Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
I'm super interested in hearing more about this. I got kids that are already dabbling in variations of this in other formats.
Yeah.
I didn't know this still existed. Like, this was a big deal when I was in school.
Oh, it's having a renaissance.
I had friends that would just disappear for hours, if not days, and just totally geek out and enjoy it. So so it's Renaissance now. Is it the same as it was before? Is it different formats? Is it all iPhone based now? What?
Oh man, it's, at core concept, it's the same, right? Like you still have your standard pieces, but it's all done digitally now. Like with the pandemic, those tools really exploded. It's fascinating. There's a couple of, just to give a quick shout out, there's an organization called Game to Grow here in Seattle, does some really awesome stuff with Dungeons and Dragons and neurodiverse youth. And they've really pushed to do remote D&D. And there's some applications, like it's all, so, instead of having to do like, okay, I need to turn to this page in this book to figure out what this spell does so that I can then roll the correct die. And then I have to add these numbers to it. You just click a button. It's like the spell shows up on a digital interface. You click the button, it does all the stuff for you, and it just spits out a number. And then you have to determine if that number works or not. So it automates a lot of the minutia of it and the tedium, so that what you're really focused on is just what's the outcome I'm looking for. It's kind of like marketing automation, I suppose, in a way. So you can really focus on what's my strategy here and how am I going to approach this problem that's in front of me, because all of the mechanics of it are handled. So that's really the only difference. Other than that, it's still, it's storytelling at its greatest. It's collaborative storytelling at its best, which I just love to death.
Yeah, I think like I'm interested, like my kids are 8, 10 and 12, and what I love about things like Dungeons and Dragons is the level of creativity it allows people, sort of like creativity, and to think about the world in a different way, and to sort of start to think about problem solving in a totally safe and fun environment. Yeah, I'd completely forgotten about the spells. We'll have to at some point, we're either going to need to do like a Heinz marketing, you're going to have to do some tutorial where you really kind of walk us through, because as much as I can sit here and talk about it, I've never actually played. We could also do, like, I don't know, Jen, if you're into this, or Michelle, like we could do sort of like a Friends of Heinz. Would it be a class? Do we do it as a hackathon? Like, I'm already way outside my my salary band here in terms of trying to describe what this is.
I mean, there's a lot of options. Like Dungeons and Dragons is a little complex. There's there's other rule sets that are simpler, that you could get in. There's one that's awesome. It's like playing Ocean's 11, where you're designing a heist. It's a whole thing that's designed around a heist, and you could do it in like 2 hours. It's a great time, honestly.
That actually sounds amazing.
That's what's up.
Yeah, that sounds cool. All right. Speaking of cool, this has been fun. Thank you, Tom. Like, this is the first one of these we've done. I think it's kind of fun to keep it as a very casual, kind of a loose vibe format. This has been awesome. Thank you so much for Michelle and Jen and a bunch of others that have been chiming in and watching. I just appreciate it. And I think you set the bar high, Tom, for just being a great guy with a great insights and just making this fun. I know we got Jamie's coming up next. Jamie's out today, probably not watching this, but we got Jamie on the team signed up to do this. For other Heinz marketing folks watching, see how fun this is. Look how easy this was. We're gonna get you out there. We're gonna learn a little more about you. Share with your insights with the world. Anyway, Tom, thanks for doing this. Thanks everyone
thanks
for
having
watching.
me.
Absolutely. Have a great weekend, everyone. We'll see you soon.
So long.